Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live stream on OTD military history. Today is going to be kind of a chat, just a general chat, laid back, nothing really planned, just a couple questions I have for today's guests, who's got quite an interesting experience and background in what he does, but it's connected to Canadian military history, which is amazing because that's the core of what I do, obviously. But from a very different perspective, which, as you all know, I very much appreciate. So it's good to get that. And as usual, if you have questions, generally speaking, about our guest or kind of anything you want to ask, we'll do our best. This isn't really kind of being about like this number, this battalion attacked here. Like that's not what we're doing. We're just kind of chatting and talking about today's guest, Alex Bowers, and what he's been doing and going to be doing, and kind of do sort of an introductory to you guys and everyone, because he's been doing some good work and because I've seen it. So I can say that it is. So I'm excited to get him go on the chat here today. But, sorry. Hold on, Alex. There you go. I had you muted. There you go.
Hey, Brad. You're right.
Thanks. So thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I've been really excited to do this for ages. I've always
loved it. It's been good to have a chance to chat. Just been busy the last little bit, so it's been good to get you on finally and talk about this. So as you know, because you've watched some shows, I like to ask people, why it is that you do what you do. And in this case, why Canadian military history? And I'm asking that in a kind of cagey way, because it's not in a strange way. It's just you don't hear this very often. No. I know Brits who do Canadian military history is kind of sometimes.
Yes.
You do a lot of it.
I do a lot of Canadian history. It's definitely a passion of mine.
And why? It's just a simple question, but why?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing, right? I mean, the fact that, as you say, a lot of Brits do talk about Canadian history to a degree, but I've definitely focused on Canadian history, right? Yeah. And I think that since we're here for a little while, I'm going to inflict upon your viewers the long story.
Go for it.
So, it's kind of two different stories sort of merging into one. And the first one is kind of basically my love for Canada, full stop. So I have actually moved to Canada now. I live in Nova Scotia. And That's actually a relatively recent thing. I moved in February with my wife, Annie. And that was after several journeys that we've had, like over the last, I've been coming here for nearly 10 years now. And Annie came, I met Annabelle about 2 weeks after my first trip out here, after I'd had the Canada bug. And I've been bringing her here ever since. But again, I've loved Canada since my mum had been coming out here in she first came out here in the 70s, and I effectively grew up with her stories. So I kind of wanted to follow in her footsteps. So that was happening, my love for Canada from an early age, and equally so was my fascination in history, which that stems more from my father. This is sounding very Freudian. I'm sorry.
All good.
But, so I was always interested in history. Again, I struggled at school sometimes with some of these things, but history was something I remained passionate about. And ultimately, the moment that the two things merged was when I came out here the first time, and I was confronted by, I was in Nova Scotia. So I came to Halifax.
Right.
And I was first learned about the story of the Halifax explosion, which was absolutely mind-blowing to me. And I think especially because it's not something that's really spoken about out in Britain, or I'd probably argue most places. Yeah. And I guess it's kind of timely now as well, because I don't know if you watched the new Oppenheimer film, but there is actually a reference to it.
Yeah, I figured there would be.
Yeah. So and again, to your viewers that don't know, it's it was these two ships that collided in Halifax Harbour, one of which had all these munitions on it, and in 1917, and it created the largest human-made explosion prior to the atomic bomb detonations. And that just blew my mind, that something so seemingly, and literally huge, had not been spoken about. And I think that was sort of the moment, the inciting incident, if you will, where I realized that I need to tell some of these Canadian stories, because they're not being told outside of Canada, that's for sure. I can't speak for inside of Canada, but they're certainly not really being spoken about outside of Canada, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's where I was at, and so I started writing about the Halifax explosion, and found out some really interesting facts about it, and then it sort of snowballed from there. And I think I'm now in a position where I take great pleasure in highlighting Canada's outstanding contribution in two world wars and in other conflicts, standing beside Britain oftentimes.
Oh, yeah.
Again, that bit in particular, I've had some debate with some people in this country about highlighting Canada's contribution in Britain, and I think I take issue, for example, with the fact that it just seems like, even though, how do I word this without insulting anyone? Yeah, all right. I'm going to insult someone, I think, but just the whole concept of Britain stood alone.
Oh, it's BS. I'll just say it. It doesn't make any sense, and it's wrong.
No.
It's never been correct.
And I think we fell in love with our own myth, and that's not to say that not every Brit like some Brits do appreciate and understand that we weren't alone, and we had, all these other countries that were standing beside us from the moment that France fell. But perhaps not enough, I'd argue. And I think, again, it's just been this prevailing myth, this Britain stood alone, that we've just fallen in love with. We've fallen in love with it because it just makes us seem like this plucky country. And it's obviously we won, but we wouldn't have been able to have done that without the people that were standing by us almost the whole way. I mean, you look at Canada, for example, and you think we're very quick to rightly thank the Americans for their contribution. But again, we're talking December 1941 that the Americans came in, right? And we're talking September 10th, am I right in saying, for the Canadians in the Second World War? Yep. So, and this is at a point, right, where you guys have got the autonomy to make that decision for yourselves.
Yep.
It's not like the First World War, where you were in by default when Britain declared war on Germany.
Yep,
you had that right. You debated it in Parliament. So you chose to stand by us within a week of our declaration of war against Nazi Germany.
Yep.
And that's important. That's something I felt that we need to talk about more. That's the fundamental of it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, obviously. Not to kind of steal your thunder, but and this is a good way to... This is Norma, good supporter of the channel and my work, and I'm sure you know her now. I'm going to frame this in a question, because I don't necessarily disagree with Norma. But you have I don't want to call it dual, I don't know. You have the experience in both, if we're going to take the context of Canada, but you're from Britain. Is it dying? I mean, I see it all the time. I see it in more of a stance from historical ignorance. I'm just going to say what it is. I don't pull punches, as you know. But also, and again, the one thing that comes up is Brexit. I think it got stronger in certain circles with Brexit.
Yeah.
And it was
absolutely. Again, it became one of the. I mean, during Brexit, obviously, there was a lot of discussion that's focused around knee-jerk reactions, such as immigration, and again, Churchill has obviously been this very powerful figure that has often been sort of taken it on by the right as their own, and they sort of, he's a very complicated figure, but. To say the least,
that's putting it mildly. I think,
to say the least, but yeah, they sort of they leaned on the whole Britain alone notion, definitely through a lot of the more recent years since post Brexit, and again, sort of talking about the whole immigration thing as well. Again, people moaning about Polish people and Czech and everything, and I'm thinking, well, good luck flying your Spitfires then.
Yeah.
Frankly, the Canadians, the South Africans, all these people that united with us, it's if it wasn't for those people coming over to that country, where would we be? Where would we be? I dread to think. And I think to go back to what Norma's saying, I'd certainly say in some circles, it's dying. I think that's a fair statement. I definitely think that's a fair statement in some circles. I think people that know their own history will be able to appreciate that. And yes, I'd say I don't want to give a blanket statement to the entirety of the United Kingdom to say we are ignorant. We're not. We do. A lot of us know our own history, but there are unfortunate people that clearly don't. And unfortunately, it's those people that can be the loudest too.
That's true.
And they're the ones that are promoting this whole, we wouldn't have had this back in 1940s sort of malarkey. And it's, I don't know what the answer to it is. I don't know how we combat that apart from knowledge, but these people
I mean, I don't think there's a way to, that's ever going to combat it and get rid of it. That's never going to happen because that's never going to happen for anything. But
it's a very entrenched view as well, obviously.
It's extremely entrenched. I mean, it's one of those ones that I don't think you're ever going to get rid of.
No.
We have lots here. Every country has them. And that's one of them. But this one has impact, obviously, because of the British Empire and the Commonwealth. And
yes, exactly.
What that meant and what that means now and all that stuff. Anyway, I didn't want to bring in kind of a modern political thing, but
I think it actually that is an important thing to talk about in the broader context of what's going on here, right? Totally. I think it's a very appropriate thing to be discussing the political environment now. It certainly does play into what people know or perhaps choose not to know about their own history. Yeah,
I mean it's so interesting because I spent this afternoon working on the RCAF in England a little bit. There's memorials all over the place, so that would show you that they were not standing alone. But it's just it's an interesting way of thinking about that because you have some people that are so out of it, don't understand anything. Advisors that are so intense, and it's even gone. I've seen it. It's rare, but I have seen it in Britain where it's gone to the other extreme, where there are people making up stories about Canadians that never really happened, which I've seen more than once. There's one where I can't remember where it is, somewhere on the coast, southern coast, somewhere, about an event where Canadians were killed that literally never happened. So I think it's an interesting. It's a spectrum, I guess, is what I always have to say. I always say that these things are spectrums. There's never one or the other.
Yeah. And again, I've been criticised by some people by the technicalities of the Canadians and a lot of people from the Empire coming to our support from the capacity of you were technically British subjects and all this and all these things. And again, I find that deeply problematic. And it also, I mean, aside from the fact that it completely diminishes the individual identities of those who chose to stand beside us. Yeah. And you could talk about the technicalities of the statements till the cows come home. I don't care. We talk about people as individuals, and we talk about the Canadians, we talk about the Indians, we talk about these people. I appreciate that there's obviously a very complex, again, to say the least, history with these nations in the empire. But we just have to talk about it from an individual perspective that doesn't diminish their identities and their role standing beside Britain.
Yeah, I mean, it happens a lot. I mean, Canada gets lost in British stories often, which is a big, issue for a lot of people here. In both world wars, happens frequently. It said, the Brits did this, and was the Canadians or the Canadian Corps, or Canadian Division, whatever. It happens all the time.
Well, you get a lot of Dominion troops.
Yeah, a lot of Dominion. Yeah,
a big blanket statement.
Yeah, that us and the Australians, New Zealanders, and South Africans are all the same.
Yeah.
Which we're not. Never have been. For all kinds of reasons. It's just it's an interesting way how people view something that is technically part of the same, right? They're all part of the empire at the time.
Sure thing.
And the Commonwealth, depending on which war you're looking at. But how it's so differently viewed, I think it's fascinating. And you're getting both perspectives, which I think is fascinating, having, grown up in Britain, but also with that Canadian connection.
Yeah, sure thing.
I think you're going to have some interesting insights for us on some things. If people want to ask questions about that, I'm sure you'd be happy to answer them.
Oh, I'll be happy to answer them as best to the best of my ability.
Yeah. So kind of moving on with that, you've done a lot of writing on various topics because you asked me to read them over.
Yes, thank you again.
Provide some quotes and things. I'm not the biggest name, but I appreciate you doing that. And
no, it's been a big deal for me. Thank you again.
And all of that. So well, actually, this frames. We got a question here from the Cold War channel. But what have you been working on? And actually, I'll just ask it now. How do you? If I say this, I'll just ask it. Are you writing towards a British audience, Canadian audience, when you're doing your work? Does that depend on the publication you're working with? All that stuff is there a blanket way you do it, or
it depends on the publication. So I've been quite blessed in managing to get a few different magazines under my belt over the years. I started writing for Britain at War magazine. That's how I got into this. So again, that would, as the name would suggest, would be a largely British audience. I mean, Britain at War magazine does sort of. I think you can buy it in other places, but obviously the main focus is Britain. So again, it's been very much a case of highlighting these Canadian stories to a British audience from that perspective. And again, I sort of picked up a few other magazines along the way. I've written for History of War magazine, which is another British publication, The Armourer. But since moving here, I've started writing for Legion magazine.
Okay.
And again, I've been writing for that. I've actually had the opportunity to write about Canadian stories, but that are perhaps tied with Britain in certain ways.
Okay.
For example, the can loan scheme, which is something that is going to be published very soon. I don't want to go into too much detail about it because it's yet to be published. But yes, I'm working on a project about the can loan scheme, which is when Canadian officers were seconded to the British Army during the Second World War. And almost all of them serve with complete distinction and earn the respect of their British comrades. So,
yeah, I think the can loan's a great way to look at that. And it's a complicated program that not a lot of people are aware of, and the nuances in it, and what that means, right? You see these Canadian officers, which was only officers for that program specifically. Mm-hmm. Going in different places, right? They fight in Normandy, where it's Canadian stories. We don't tell those parts of the stories. I mean, I've had people do it, like Rich Fisher did that. He has a book written by a can loan officer who's in one of the heavy machine gun.
It's a terrific book.
Yeah, and it's great. Yeah, it's a great one. I think they still have some copies left. Anyway, plug for him
They do.
and the Vickers organization there. But it's just so fascinating how these different things can come.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the can loan scheme, again, it sort of goes back to the whole thing of Canadian officers often found themselves having to earn the respect of their British comrades, who a lot of them were quite dismissive at first. I mean, perhaps not a lot of them, but certainly a proportion of them were dismissive of them, calling them colonials and all that, and then I think there's, there's this evolution of the relationship between these Canadian officers in these British units, where one of my favorite stories actually is when they were asking for reinforcements. Sort of after Normandy, you've had a massive casualty rate in the British Army at this point. And they're given the choice. These British soldiers are given the choice between a Canadian and a British, and their response is unanimous, and it's bring us the goddamn Canadian. And I just love that. Love that.
Yeah, you see that a lot in Bomber Command as well, because it was more about the individual. It wasn't about the nationality. And it was about the experience. The experience was key. It didn't really matter where someone grew up.
Absolutely.
What
as
they
long
did.
as they can lead. As long as they can lead in that way.
They could lead in what they did in the air on the battlefield is what mattered more than an accent.
Absolutely.
Especially back then, because it was a lot more similarities than people are willing to admit, I think, in a lot of ways. But maybe we can get into that a little bit. But great question, actually. And so I'll just pop it up here from Jason, who's kind of, I'm going to call him this now, the resident Ortona / urban warfare.
I think that's a fair statement about Jason.
Of OTD. Because making him do that now because we're going to have him back again. But just going to read it for anyone who might just be listening for later. As a British military historian who has an outsider's view, quote unquote, so to speak, what are your frustrations and highlights of researching / writing Canadian military history? That's an excellent question, Jason. Thanks.
Okay, so hang on. I'm just going to try and turn a light on, maybe, because I've noticed it's quite dark.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Ponder your question. There we go.
That might be better.
Yeah, that's better. You're all right.
Marginally better. Yeah. So certainly, when I was back in the UK, it was much, much more difficult to write about Canadian stories, because obviously I was really struggling for the resources.
Right.
These books aren't readily available. And one of my first introductions to Canadian military history, when I really started getting into it, was Dr. Cook's book of the Canadian War Museum, which I know you have a great respect for Dr. Cook. I have a huge respect for Dr. Cook myself. And I just remember ordering his book, and it took weeks to arrive. Weeks. And to my understanding, it wasn't coming from overseas per se, but it was just, I don't know, maybe they had to dig it out from underneath of a pile somewhere. But I think that was definitely one of the biggest challenges that I had, was obtaining these resources, because I'd say books on Canadian military history aren't necessarily readily available in the United Kingdom. It's a shame, but I think that's just the reality of the situation. You can get American books, but it's easier said than done to get a Canadian book.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Just jump in here real quick, because last time I was in England was around the centenary of the armistice in 1918, and so obviously World War I was the focus. A lot of British, obviously, no Canadian. I didn't see any, maybe one or two. But some American, like you said, it was rather odd. Really, really strange, given Canada's role and Canadian Corps, 100 days, and so basically our commemorations are basically the same. That war anyway. It's really interesting, but
if anything, for that war in particular, like you're saying,
well, and then actually I take that question further. Now that you're here, I know you haven't been here. You've been here about 6 months? Not even yet.
Roughly 6 months now.
What's the frustrations now?
Oh gosh, for telling Canadian stories. Again, I mean, so
frustrate or highlights, doesn't have to just be frustration.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would still say that there are still challenges, but I think that's because since coming over here, I've wanted to go more and more niche with my Canadian military history stories.
Yeah, I
like to challenge myself. I recently wrote about, for example, the Battle of Kapyong during the Korean War. Yep. That again, there are resources available, but you've got to go looking for them. And just smaller, little-known stories that, again, they haven't been covered to a wider audience, and the books just aren't out there. Or if they are out there, they're perhaps outdated, and perhaps some of the information isn't as reliable as you might hope. So, for example, I've written about sort of in Nova Scotia here. I've written about Camp Norway, which was a Norwegian military base after the Nazis invaded Norway. That the Norwegians had nowhere really to go. They'd been out on their ships whaling, and they had literally nowhere to go. So they ended up going to Lunenburg in Nova Scotia, and they ended up establishing a base there. And again, I find that a fascinating story. But I think there's one book on it, and it was written in like the 90s.
Right.
And I like to cross-reference wherever I can, obviously, and sort of delve deep into some primary source records. But that can be easier said than done, even especially when you go niche.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna ask this. Hopefully, it's not too much of an indelicate question, but it is something on my mind because, like I said earlier, nationality and all that stuff should matter, but to some people it does. Has that come up? Has someone ever said to you, "You're a Brit. What are you doing? Why are you telling your own stories?"
Yeah. I've had people say, "Why didn't you tell your own history?" Many times, and I think that's insulting in more than one way.
Yeah.
To me, I just sure I could write about British history, but I mean, I don't bloody want to. There's enough people doing it, frankly, and I think. There's people like you. Then there's such a nice community with the Canadian military history community that I've felt so honored to be a part of, and I can't picture myself doing anything else apart from this now. In part because of that, because I think that's what I like about Canadian military historians is we all seem to sort of bounce off each other and all sort of help each other out. And I think because there's such a large market of British historians out there, British history historians, that it's easier said than done to get that same sort of camaraderie. I mean, obviously there are the communities. You've got like We Have Ways, which was a fantastic hub for those sort of things.
Yeah.
But I like the tightly knit community I've managed to cultivate with my Canadian military historian friends.
Yeah, I mean, we're a small community, obviously, because
Yeah.
I mean, we're not the smallest population. I mean, we tend to think we are, but we're not. We're 40 million people now. I mean, it's not.
Yeah,
Nothing.
you're doing all right. You're doing okay.
Well, not us. You're part of us now, by the way. I
Yeah,
consider
yeah.
you,
I'll take it.
I consider you Canadian now, so you don't get off easy on these things, the Canadian stuff anymore. And someone made a joke about how I praised one of the tweets this morning, and I'm like, nah, he's Canadian now. It doesn't matter.
I'm all for it. I'll take it.
All the benefits and the negatives that come with that. But
yeah, well, I guess that's the same with any country, right?
Yeah, we got lots of benefits. Someone asked you about moving to Ottawa, and I'm like, don't. You'll freeze to death.
Yeah.
Or sweat to death. Both. You get both in a 6-month period. It's lovely.
Oh, that's why I love Canada. There's such a variety.
Well, you got the East Coast there. You guys are a little more ish. Well, not so much recently, but anyway, yeah.
Again, we've had our troubles over here. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things I think that Steve has put this a good way about. People who tell you to write their own history don't understand their own, which is often the case. People get stuck in these mindsets of how this all comes and how it should be done, and I don't agree. And obviously, and I believe in an open community, as you know, and anyone with any sort of interest, as long as they're willing to have an open mind and not just do the basics and not engage. That's to me, the engagement is huge. So that's obviously what's important to me.
And it's important to me as well.
So that's great to hear. And Norma's already singing your praises here, so that's good to know.
I'm glad. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to help Norma recently. So, and I hope to do more in the future. Yeah, again, this is what we're talking about. We're all in it together, and we're all here to help each other.
Yeah. I was gonna say because there's just not many of us. So, and we know we're outnumbered by the big brother to the south, and
yes. Again,
not a little bigger, the bigger brother across the pond. Even though we tend to compete more with the Americans, which is interesting. But it's so interesting how nationality can play on this and all that. So I was just wondering, again, kind of jumping off that same sort of question, though, because you've had, I want to call it those dual experiences, right, of seeing things through kind of the British lens and now into the Canadian stuff. And again, I'm not trying to be negative, but I am trying to draw out some of these things about what you've kind of come across in terms of what Canadians think of their own history, because you've been digging in this, like you said, you've been doing niche stuff. Is there anything that kind of sticks out to you that we kind of keep harping on, or that we're just plain wrong about, or we're kind of a little really cocky about? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I tell you the thing that I've taken issue with is how many people. One of the people that are bemused by my interest in Canadian history, they say things like, "Why are you interested in our history? We're so new." Or
oh yes,
and I'm thinking that's sort of sweeping under the carpet a few millennia there, isn't it?
A few people, yeah.
I've found that very strange that there's been that sort of prevailing mentality that maybe in some people's head, Canadian history starts in, I don't know, 1867, or maybe just a little bit before then. I don't know, but I guess that's the mentality I've heard from some Canadians. That surprised me a little bit. That has surprised me. I just thought, that. I mean, again, it's hard to not make it sound like it's blanket statements, because it's obviously not all Canadians, but. To think about it from that sort of Eurocentric lens, is an issue. And and for a country that's what I would argue is hugely progressive in so many different ways, just to look at it from such a narrow lens is just a little surprising. It's a little surprising,
Yeah, I mean, I see it often. It's not just even necessarily a Canadian thing; it could be a North American thing, I think, as well.
Yeah, I suspect that probably.
It could be an American thing. I don't know. Yeah. I don't really know, South America as well. But I've heard some other people from other countries as well saying the same sort of thing, like Caribbean, kind of, mostly Caribbean. But the same idea that it's a European thing. Basically, I'll just say the white people showed up, and that's what like it's just like what or I mean, that bugs me with things like nationality, when like, oh, you can't call them Canadians till 1867. I'm like, hey, there's the province of Canada. So
yes, well, there you go. Exactly.
You're wrong, but also that's just not how identity works, right?
No.
Identity changes. People's identities change over a lifetime.
Hmm.
So you can't just say, these things. So that's kind of interesting that
Yeah.
I'm not surprised to hear that.
And it's also in the context of talking about more specifically military history. Again, there's been this prevailing Eurocentric view or just white view of Canadian military history that I again found surprising. So, for example, when I was researching for the Halifax explosion, there are several important figures that sort of come out of that. Obviously, one of the most famous ones is Vincent Coleman, who was this telegraph dispatcher who had been beside the pier when he saw these two ships colliding in the harbour, and he knew what was in one of them. And he knew what was going to happen, or at least he had a sense when he saw the fire coming out, and he stayed behind and he wrote a message to the local train that was due to come into Halifax that day, and told them to hold the train. Goodbye, boys, or words to that effect, because he knew that was that. And that's obviously a very important story. That's very important. But there was other stories that I discovered that I found equally interesting. Was, for example, one of them was this guy known as Dr. Clement Ligure, who was one of Nova Scotia. He was a black Nova Scotian, who a doctor who had been denied the opportunity to work in the local hospital for reasons I probably don't need to tell you. And on that day, after the Halifax explosion occurred, he mobilized himself in a local clinic that he had established before the explosion, but he had his own little clinic. And he saved hundreds and hundreds of lives. He all these people that were seriously wounded. And again, it's one of these things that if you're in that much of a wounded state, it doesn't matter what your political views are. If the man in front of you is offering to help, you're going to accept it, right?
Yeah.
And so again, it's those sort of things that we talk often about, Canadians from the white point of view, but you've got all these interesting stories from these minority. Tommy Prince, for example. I mean, what a cool guy that was. He was,
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we're having a reckoning with here, and I'm using that word deliberate because it is, and it's a long time coming. That's why I choose that word specifically, because again, study this stuff. I do historiography as well as part of that academic background. I can't not see it. It's literally right there. It's literally behind me on some of those books. So it's something that I'm glad is being recognized for. How long are we into this? Our shittiness. We're half an hour in. I can say those words every now and again. I don't get demonetized, which I'm already having trouble with lately. Anyway, that's just nice that people are noticing that and being like, yeah, you got to do better here.
Yeah,
because I completely agree. Now I want to go a little lighthearted with this question because I think we need that a little bit. Because
I'd like
to talk about Halifax, and then I started thinking about Africaville and how
that
whole thing went. Anyway, so because you saw the Halifax explosion. For all of us millennials out there who grew up watching Canadian cable, Heritage Minutes, those things kind of were our introduction to all kinds of things and all our jokes about smelling toast and peach baskets. Have you watched them?
I've watched so many of them.
How many have you watched? All of them yet?
No, I've not watched all of them. I mean, how many are there?
There's a lot. There's your homework assignment. Go to their YouTube channel. Watch the old ones.
Okay. I've watched some of the old ones. They're very entertaining.
Interesting. Yeah. What's your favorite?
Favorite Heritage Minute, full stop.
Yep.
Oh God. Oh my God, that is such a difficult question. I think there was a couple from Juno Beach that I found very, very deeply moving. Okay. I'm just trying to remember. Can you jog my memory? Well, there's at least two Juno Beach ones. Am I right?
Yeah, they did one for just what was his name? It was kind of a general one, but he was a musician. What about one of the musicians?
Oh yes, the guy playing the trumpet. And then there was this other Canadian who I think he was one of the oldest Canadians that was
McNaughton. Archie McNaughton with the North Shore. That came out 3 years ago, not that long ago.
So that's relatively recent.
Those are the new ones. Yeah, I was hoping you'd seen some of the older ones. Like
I've seen some of the older ones too. I remember
basketball
watching
one.
Winnie, for example.
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
That was very sweet.
Everyone's bringing up the burnt toast one. I don't know if you've seen that one about brain surgery. You should have watched that immediately upon ending this.
Okay, well, I think if any of your viewers are following me as well, please send me links to these.
Yeah, send them. Everybody send. Oh, and I've linked your Twitter so people can check you out afterwards on your YouTube channel, which we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah.
So send them some homework, people. We need him to get caught up, and they're literally 60 seconds. There are all 60. It's crazy that they were able to do that for basically everyone.
Oh, do you know the one actually I really liked? I just thought Mona Parsons.
Yes, yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah,
that's a really interesting story. Again, I think that's probably pretty recent.
Yeah, it's last couple of years as well.
Yeah, but again, I just find her story just amazing, and just the fact that they sort of Harry Foster and her after the war. I mean, that's just it's.
I know, and everything she did, and then everything he's connected to, and then the whole thing with his son and that book. Oh God.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's an American story. They would have made a movie out of that.
Oh God, yeah. Well, there's so many ones that I'm not the only one who says that, but I mean, it's Johnny Lombardi. Yeah. So thanks, Great Dominion, for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Crazy. Yeah. Yes. Anyway, so it's so you got to watch some of those. So people tag him in those, your favorites, and make sure he watches them. You got to watch the basketball one. That's the one I request because I quote that one all the time because it comes up a lot.
I love that.
The invention of basketball, which is Canadian, sort of. Naismith was Canadian, but it's invented in Boston. We know that. Anyway,
I just love how you sort of it's just become such a part of your culture.
Oh yeah, it's in there. If you're a millennial and you grew up watching TV in that time, it's just stuck with you just because they were so prevalent for us watching TV. So when we were young,
it's such a great concept as well, isn't it? Just to sort of bring this bit of history into a minute, and so you latch on to people, and you appreciate that perhaps some of these people probably wouldn't want to watch an hour-long documentary.
Exactly.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's almost a shame perhaps that not enough, other countries aren't doing it. But then again, I guess it's kind of uniquely Canadian. So
yeah, it's kind of become our thing. Which is really good. But that's definitely one of the Canadian things you got to get in. You got to understand that to get us in a way, and how we kind of understand things.
Yeah,
I just want
to apologize, by the way, because the light is fading on me, and I'm currently house sitting, and I don't know where any of the light switches are. I've got a light right in front of me, and it's tantalizingly close, but I don't know how to turn it on. So I'm sorry to look a bit gloomy or pastely white in the middle.
So there's your assignment for now. So another thing that may get people excited and get you more work, like you need it, but like we all need more work. But you also have a YouTube channel yourself. It's relatively new. You've been at it for a couple months. You've got one video out there. Can you kind of talk about what you're planning to do with that, and maybe even talk about the video you have put out? That would be
sure.
Awesome.
So my YouTube channel, I've called myself Past Blast, so you can find me on YouTube there. I think you put the link to it, or
down below.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you. So again, I just wanted to bring up some of these little known stories about Canada, and it's been an amazing opportunity to do that with the one video I've got so far. I've got plans for other ones, and they're starting to come to a head now. So you will be seeing more soon. But my first video was about British evacuees that came to Canada during the Second World War, which we talk about evacuee programs in the United Kingdom from the perspective of domestic evacuees. Most people know about those, right? Because you've got some iconic books on it, and like sort of Goodnight, Mr. Tom, and all these famous pieces that have sort of very much had a huge influence on British culture. And again, it's very British centric for that obvious reason. But again, there was so many British children that went to various different countries. So Canada being one of them, but also you had them going to South Africa, you had them going to Australia, you had New Zealand. And it was all under this scheme called the Children's Overseas Reception Board. So some children did go to America as well, but they couldn't quite work out the whole scheme logistics. So some of them were sent out there privately instead with their families often. But again, it's just this unique connection to Canada that people haven't really heard much about. and I've taken great pleasure in telling those little known stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story, and I can't not think about it. But the connection to home children as well, which is the same time period, different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically, just getting rid of people they didn't want in Britain and shipping them off without their consent. So it's something that I think is bigger than people realize.
Absolutely.
Because people have ancestors that are the result of that and don't even know.
Yeah.
And they're alive because of that. And it's just, it blows my mind that these programs, and then during the war and as well, and even after, it went beyond as well for a little bit, which is blew my mind when I read about the home children. How
I think that's incredible. I mean, when I've written I've not written too extensively about the home children per se, but obviously that sort of had a huge influence on some of the decision-making process that was involved in the Children's Overseas Reception Board, because obviously some of these children had difficult times. Some of them had faced forced labor and abuse, and it's a lot worse, frankly. And that's not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them had happy childhood here. But again, the Children's Overseas Reception Board, it didn't really have that same sort of issue, surprisingly. It was about a 10-year gap from when the last home children had arrived in Canada in the 1930s to the 1940s. And I always find it kind of strange how there weren't that widespread same sort of stories that were being told. But no, according to records, it seems like most evacuees that came over from Britain to Canada during the Second World War, they didn't have those sort of same issues, So no, it's fascinating. And again, like you were saying about how many people sort of trace their their origins to these schemes. When I posted about the home children once, I found it quite amazing to find all the people that were commenting on it and sending pictures.
Yeah, Norma,
stories. Right, well. Again, Norma was one of them. Yeah, Norma was one of them. I remember that distinctly. Yeah. So again, it's had a huge influence on Canadian and British history in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it comes up a lot, and more not technically, more in the guise of the United States, because obviously the land border, but how fluid these borders were, and how us as lockdown, tight borders, passport everywhere society today, it's hard for us to kind of wrap our heads around. But again, I was trying to things with nationality, things were a lot more fluid, so it makes more sense. Also, and why I brought up the home children, right, is because there's that history of that. Getting people out, and people are asking questions about the video, but I'm gonna go say make them go watch it.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Thank you.
We're not gonna answer them because we're gonna make them go watch it.
Yes, I like it. Yeah,
and like the video, and then you'll answer the questions.
Yes, that will help my algorithm. Help my algorithm.
Yeah. And if you video didn't answer it, you'll answer it in the comments.
Yes,
see, that's how you do it. And we're at Cold War channel here. David said as well, just don't read the comments. Or do.
No,
there's some
it's
doozies.
Probably inevitable, isn't it?
It's inevitable. Yeah, you're gonna get some doozies. So I know you said you're working on stuff, but can you give us a little insight of what you might be doing?
Yeah, sure. So I've been sort of writing quite extensively about Canadian Victoria Cross recipients for History of War magazine in particular. And again, I found that so fascinating to tell these stories, particularly because there's so many academic historians out there that are telling the bigger picture of these set piece battles and everything, but to be able to tell these stories from the ground, and certainly these Victoria Cross recipients are clear evidence of that.
Yes.
I find that quite a moving thing, because you really feel like you're personally connecting to them, and you learn so much about people as individuals, because obviously these people were heralded as heroes so often, but not many of them wanted that necessarily.
No.
I think a lot of Victoria Cross recipients in particular would probably have a few choice words to say if you started calling them a hero. As far as a lot of them were concerned, they were doing a job, but they just so happened to do it pretty well on that any given day.
Yeah, I mean, and you've written on him, but I mean, the one that sticks out to me, just because he was so, I'll just say outright famous, because in Canada especially, is David Curry, and his just, I don't know what word to use, but his nonchalantness. He was like, it wasn't me, it was the men.
Yeah,
it wasn't me. So he said that over and over and over.
He did repeatedly. Yeah,
and he is one of the ones who deserved it.
He was really was. I mean, it's interesting because when you write about these Victoria Cross recipients, you all think that they're incredible people almost all of the time. But a lot of the times you find out that sometimes perhaps they've been awarded the medal on behalf of like the units.
Yeah.
There's been arguments. I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to upset any fans of any particular VC heroes or recipients. There you go. Some people they've argued that perhaps it was less them that earned the award and more the unit, and because they were perhaps in an officer capacity, they became the representative of that.
Yeah, that's not unheard of. It's not just a VC thing as well.
No, absolutely.
Other gallantry awards from other countries. I know that for a fact. But yeah, so it's good to know that you're digging into those, because I don't want to say they're underrepresented stories, because I don't think they are. I mean, they are ones that are known, but in the way, and I know because I know the way you're doing it. Yeah, I think it's a good way that you're going about doing it and digging into it into a way. Not gonna say that hasn't been done, but it's in a fresh way and a fresh perspective. Because again, you have that, quote unquote outsider perspective, and I think that's sometimes necessary when it comes to things like gallantry awards and all that Rambo crap. You need sometimes a little bit of a different perspective.
Because otherwise you're just going to be putting them up on a pedestal, and there's not going to be any nuance to the discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least that there is a risk of that. And I tell you, there's something, and I think again, that's why I found writing about Canadian Victoria Cross recipients so fascinating, because you find out some of the characters behind them and some of the issues that they had, and they weren't perfect people, not all of them anyway. And I mean, one of my favorite Victoria Cross recipients is Paul Triquet, who he very much struggled with the celebrity status that he received, and he had issues with his anger and other things post-war for completely justifiable reasons in so many different ways. But that's what I find so interesting about him. That's probably why he's one of my favorites, because you could really have a really interesting character study of him. And he's just so fascinating. He's just so fascinating and sometimes tragic. Tragic.
Yeah, especially Trinquet. Yeah, he struggled a lot.
Well,
I mean, the one that sticks out to me is Smokey Smith. I mean, he was demoted. He was promoted and demoted. I don't even know how many times.
I think it was like 9 times.
It was ridiculous.
If I remember correctly, it was 9 times. How could you even do that?
He was a good soldier. I mean, sorry, he was a good fighter. He was a terrible. Someone said this earlier when we were talking. He was a terrible soldier, but an excellent fighter, and they are different.
They can be different, it's again, it's this whole "cometh the hour, cometh the man" sort of mentality again. You might not have wanted to have faced him in an alleyway per se, but when you're facing a panther tank, suddenly he becomes your best mate.
Exactly. I mean, he was just not that Smokey. I never met him, unfortunately, because he passed. But people have met him. He's the nicest guy ever. But he's
that's a good point.
He is into that military structure. Just wasn't him, right?
No.
But he was a fighter, but he wasn't a soldier in that sense. So. And I think that can get lost, and we put them on this pedestal and everything, and we can lose those nuances, which is I'm glad you are cognizant of. I'm going to use a fancy academic word there of what that means, because sometimes I'm not bashing anyone in particular. Just it's a trend that happens, I think, across history. But sometimes in that more popular magazine type articles that you write can get lost. And it's just regurgitating the same thing over and over and over again.
No, I try and avoid that wherever I can, and I try and make it about the humans behind the award. I think that's so important, because it really is just a piece of metal in the whole grand scheme of things. And you've just got to look at the human person and what they sacrificed and what they gave in that moment to have that symbolic piece of metal. Yeah.
Well, here's a question. I don't want to miss it. It's from earlier, but from David from Cold War Channel here. What is your biggest, holy moment as part of your research? Everyone's got one of these.
But it's kind of like one of those questions where you really got to take a moment to think about it. Holy, can I even say it? Or, I mean, do you get in trouble with the algorithm if you say the words? Or
well, I think I already said it, but I try to keep it to a minimum.
Try to keep it friendly. Yeah. Biggest No, that's. I tell you what. Actually, no, I've got one.
Oh, here we go.
I couldn't believe how bizarre the Battle of Bowmanville was.
Yeah.
That was like I was reading about this. So again, for those that don't know, it's a German POW revolt that happened in a Canadian prisoner of war camp,
Yep.
and it just gets utterly ridiculous. It is just insane what happens there. I mean, you've got people using hoses and sticking them in buildings to sort of wash out the Germans that are sort of hampered in there. You've got them throwing jam jars. You've got, it's just the most bizarre thing I've ever written about in my entire life. It is just so strange, and I loved every second of it.
It's a weird one. It's a really, really weird story, and yeah, it's hard to explain in a forum like this. So if anybody wants to know, they got to go do some digging.
Yeah.
The more you look into it, the weirder it just gets, and the response and the reasons why, and
yeah. Obviously, it's got a very dark background to it. Very much hinged on the Dieppe raid.
Yeah.
But by the time you're actually in the camp, and suddenly all these displeased Germans are facing off against the Veterans Guard in Canada, I remember reading it thinking, this can't be true. That's ridiculous.
It sounds fake. I mean, well, there are a lot of stories that sound like it's a movie.
Exactly.
You wrote that.
It feels like it should be a comedy, right?
Yeah, almost in a way. I mean,
in a weird way.
It's such a weird one. I mean, again, it's hard to explain. I should really do something on that, but it's just it's such a hard story, and then time is precious. But hard one to do. Because it's hard to explain everything.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, but that's probably one of the moments where I was just reading this, thinking, nah.
Not the only one we have like that. We got many.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm sure you'll come across more. There's all kinds of crazy stuff.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, you'll find all kinds of stuff. So if anyone has any other questions, fire away now. That would be awesome, because we'll wrap it up shortly. But so that's a good one. That's a good pick. Bowmanville is an interesting one. I just want to say it stands in contrast to some other German POWs who like Canada so much they came back.
Well, that's it. Absolutely, yeah. I'd be interested to know if any of the ones that were actually involved in that, whether or not.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think maybe they had a bit of a sour taste in their mouth by the end of it.
I would imagine so. I mean, because I've only heard stories secondhand, but people would meet them in town, like they'd let them go buy stuff at the hardware store.
Yeah, I know. Again,
the farmer they were working for, and it's just like, okay,
yeah.
And
just
the contrast,
passing a German in the street in the middle of the Second World War,
wearing like I don't know, but they made them wear like a uniform almost, but like it was like a freaking uniform. But it was just my grandfather had stories like that because he grew up around the Windsor area, lots of farms. Lots of those. So it was just really interesting. It's just like it was normal, but also weird.
I guess they just normalized it, like you say. Absolutely.
Because it just stands in contrast to how the Germans treated so many other people.
Absolutely.
It's another thing that drives me crazy is when people try to compare, and I'm just like,
no, you just can't. That's
it's not even close, even remotely at all.
No.
So I kind of want to jump back on what Jason asked earlier, and going to put you on the spot a little bit, not in a hard history question, but I do want your opinion on this. Is there an event? Is there a military history thing, or you can pick whatever you want, event, battle, person that we spend too much attention on, or we're a little too, let's say, cocky about it? Is there something that sticks out to you?
That's spending too much. Well, I best not say Altona. I'm only joking, Jason. I'm only joking.
We need more Altona. More.
Yeah. Perhaps you spend too much time on. Well, I guess the obvious answer would probably be Dieppe, I guess. Okay. And that comes from this person that's been very fascinated about Dieppe myself. I had the honor of going to the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe raid commemorations last year. That was a very moving experience. But again, it sort of comes back to what, and I'm going to sort of riff off Tim Cook's more recent Second World War book about Canadian history and memory.
Yep.
And how I think there's often been this focus some of the more difficult moments, like Dieppe, like Hong Kong, and sort of framing it in the context of failure.
Yep.
And it's doing yourself a disservice, guys. Serious disservice. I mean, obviously, we need to talk about these things, and that's not to diminish them. They obviously had an important part, and it's obviously something we need to still be talking about. But I mean, just look at the outstanding things you did elsewhere. You've got, I mean, the tactical victory of Altona. You've got I'd say the strategic victory of the Scheldt. You've got the Battle of the Atlantic, for goodness sake. That's all these incredible moments in the Second World War, for sure. And again, I think if you're looking back in the First World War, the obvious answer to that question would be Vimy.
How dare you? It's on the money, or it used to be. I don't know.
Drink it.
How dare you say what most people are saying anyway?
Yes.
Vimy. I'm not going on about Vimy again, but I mean,
no. But again, it's this whole. If it from the context of like a British person, I could understand the whole concept of falling in love with your own myth, right?
Yeah.
So for us, it's that moment after Dunkirk and the fall of France and Dunkirk. For you, it seems to be Vimy. That seems to be your myth.
It is. Sadly, but it is.
Yeah. Just you gravitate to it, and I think what I found scary is some people I've spoken to, from like Canadians, that perhaps they don't know as much about their own history. That's okay. I'd be out of a job if people knew everything. But the one thing that they always know is Vimy. Yeah. And I'm thinking, come on, guys, just look a little bit either side, right?
I mean, we've got a lot more interesting stories from the First World War and any more important battles. I mean, Vimy is inconsequential, to be honest.
It is, yeah.
In the long run.
Sorry if I'm upsetting anyone there.
It's okay. I've done whole shows on it. I don't care.
Okay.
It's just Jason is still here, so
yeah. Very dangerous. I like to play it dangerously.
So this is an interesting one because there's not many of them, but I think I agree with David here. Do you have a favorite Canadian military history movie? And if you answer Passchendaele,
no, it's a terrible movie. I've seen it.
So bad.
I think. Oh, that's a really hard one. I mean, you don't really have many, do you? So it was interesting. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine about the most recent Forgotten Battle.
Yep.
I got pretty excited when that came out because obviously it's talking about one of the most important land battles that the Canadians were involved in the Second World War. Yep. And I think I was sort of watching it with rose-tinted glasses in that regard. Because I was just excited. Oh, it's the Canadians, finally. Yeah. But it took my friend to point out that for the vast majority of the film, the Canadians are kind of sidelined in their own battle. It focuses so heavily on these British glider pilots, on the Dutch resistance. They're getting involved in, and there's this Dutch German soldier as well. And then it kind of like you just sort of 2/3 of the way in the movie, you start throwing in the Canadians just a little bit. There's a couple of quite striking battle scenes. I'll give credit there. But I think that I found it took someone to point that out to me. It's like, oh, hang on a minute. You're absolutely right.
It's so weird. It's such a weird movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have an issue with the local stuff. I thought the local stuff was actually really
good. It's fair.
I mean,
maybe just a bit disproportionate, perhaps.
I mean, it just also doesn't make any logical sense. I mean, he's literally that British glider pilot who's been wandering around since Market Garden. Should smell like death and have a beard way down here by now. Yeah, and starving. Yes. He's just been wandering around, and then he's just jumping from unit to unit, like he's in the 3rd Division. Then he's with the Highland Division. I'm just like, just going wherever he wants. Apparently, he can do whatever he wants.
It's just a freewheeler at this point, isn't he?
Yeah, it's just there's things with like wrong weapons and kit. I'm not even getting down to that level.
Oh, okay, yes.
I don't even expect that, to be honest, ever.
No, again, it's those sort of things that you sort of you kind of maybe turn a blind eye to at times. I mean, obviously it's better if you get it right.
Yeah,
but I think just the broader context of I just felt like the Canadians were fundamentally played second fiddle in their own battle.
We're used to it.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about that.
Well, nothing you can do about it.
And it's just one of these things. I mean, it's from a British perspective, obviously, for me personally, I want to tell your Canadian stories, but Canadians can't necessarily rely on Brits or Americans to tell your stories as a rule of thumb.
Yep.
That's on you guys, in the nicest possible way. And I
hope
you do it.
You say that. And I'm glad you're saying that, because I've said this before. And again, sorry, I'm not going to get on the soapbox a little bit here, but I see it all the time in terms of, especially YouTube. I see it a lot. Is people, and then people have their favorites channels. That I get that they have their favorite channels in history, especially, and they're like, "Can you cover this? Can you cover that?" And I'm like, Canadians already covered that. It might be me, but a Canadian's already covered that. Yeah. You know what I mean? That we expect other people to do it for us, and we're like, let's just do it ourselves. We Absolutely. Can do it. We have the ability.
You've got the ability.
We just don't really do it. It's something that I obviously have studied a lot, and I did a dissertation on a defeat, right? So thought about these things a lot and why they are the way they are. And it's just, I'm glad that you're saying it as, again, a quote unquote outsider, because it's true. And if we don't do something about it, the stories will go nowhere, and they might get forgotten. Unfortunately, I'm not one to think that often, but it is true. But
absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to throw a question to you now then. Like, can you see hope on the horizon for something like that? And I don't mean to leave it on a pessimistic note in case the answer is no.
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, I go up and down, right, as the journey of life typically is. Right now, I'm kind of pessimistic about it, to be completely honest with you, because of just my own experience. It's difficult. It's very difficult to get these stories to get noticed, because there are such bigger numbers from other people who typically aren't Canadian. Channels, but like David, who does the Cold War channel, is Canadian, and he's done a fantastic job. And
he does a great job,
in like getting those stories out there and having that success, which is amazing. But I mean, I've been struggling with I've never done just Canadian, but a lot of it was mostly Canadian, and it just kind of stagnated for quite a long time. And so I'm rather pessimistic about it now, to be honest. I think it might end up just being the same. We're just sitting around waiting for somebody else to make it. It's so hard because it takes so much time and effort, especially when you're someone like me. You know, it's difficult to get it out there and to do it well, because we have all sorts of issues with access to resources. Like Library Records Canada wouldn't let me record with my phone a film that I was doing research for another national institution just to show them what they had. I got told no. And I'm like, what am I? It's some guy in a blimp over the Arctic. I'm like, yeah, the next blockbuster is coming from this film. Just let me take it. It's like, what is going on?
Yeah.
It was so weird. So anyway, so we do things like that, and we shoot ourselves in the foot, and we don't put money where we need to. And I mean, Susan just said it here, and she's an American, and she knows this. It's all about the money.
Yeah.
We just don't have enough money, and I think interest. I'm trying, but it's tough. And obviously growing an audience and people on the side where it's just singing to the choir at this point, to be honest.
Yeah.
Not that they're not doing a great job at helping, but it's difficult, and we're just outnumbered. Like I already said at the beginning, we're just simply outnumbered. So, I mean, trying not to be pessimistic, trying to stay positive, but I am trying to understand what I'm doing. So I don't know if that says something, but I'm just trying to. Honestly, the plan is to get more people in, also because we're an hour in and not everyone always watches to the end. I'm trying to get more people in and then be like, ha, it's actually a Canadian channel, you know.
Surprise!
Tricked you. Well, that's kind of the thinking, right? Is to, you know, do it in a different way. Well, and David's talking about this. He says he's part of the problem, which he's not. But, you know, he's not done Canadian stuff. I'll just keep yelling at him until he does. But when he will do Canadian stuff, it's going to get a huge audience because of what he's done. So like, that's great to me. I mean, it's fantastic. So I'm trying to stay positive, but to be honest, it's difficult.
Yeah, I understand. I think you guys have just got to push a bit harder. Going back to saying about sort of it's all fair and well that Britain and the States have often these big sort of films and sort of resources. Frankly, as your American viewer rightly says, we do actually have that behind us, so we do have that advantage. But again, you guys do have the capacity to have it.
We could have it. We just don't want it.
Yeah. And I think that's a real shame because I think I've just been taken real joy in highlighting some of these stories and discovering them for myself, frankly. I've been learning with everyone about Canadian military history, and there's just so many stories out there that are just so worthy of a broader audience. It's not just about talking necessarily in the context of Canadians should be making these films for themselves or making doing these projects for themselves. There's some good stuff out there that I think would be appreciated by Americans, by British people, by people the world over.
I mean, this is kind of something I just thought of, but because just with the work you've done with the VCs, right? You just hook out that there were Canadians. See where that would go. It's like it'd be like Aubrey Cousins. Don't mention that he was in, the Queen's Own. Just leave it vague. I wonder if that would just blow up.
If you get some more traction going there.
Yeah, because I've literally had people say, "I don't care about Canadian. I don't want to learn about this. Don't bother me. I'm not coming back ever again." Like I've had that happen. So that's why again a little bit of the pessimism. So it's because I've seen that because it just I took Canadian out of all the names. To be honest, I don't think most of them are just OTD now. It doesn't have Canada in the name because I've had people be like, "We don't want Canada. We don't care. We want other stories." So it is what it is. But trying to convert more people, and I have converted people, which is cool. But hopefully you can help.
Well, yeah, I'll help do my own small part. It goes back to this whole thing about having this amazing community, and we might be small, but I think what we achieve and what we can when we put our heads together, who knows?
Yeah, that's more positive.
There you are. I thought I'd leave it on a positive note.
Let's leave it positive with that. So yeah, we can. We'll see what comes up. We can always do something together with the channels.
I think that'd be fantastic.
Got something else going on, whatever. Always open, always looking for things to do on the channel. So, especially with Canadian stuff. So,
yes,
and I'll call you again Canadian now because you're here. So,
I'm all for it.
I don't take much to make Canadians. I'm like, oh, you live here now. Oh, you're Canadian. Good thing.
It's what I've wanted my whole life, so you're doing me a favor, mate.
I should be in charge of these things. I'm like, you live here, you're Canadian. It's fine. Anyway, I'm just going to do a quick sign off, and then we'll say goodbye together, okay?
Okay, that sounds fun.
So thanks everyone for watching and for Alex coming out on the channel to chat about Canadian military history, his experience, and everything like that. So like I said, go to his channel, check out that new video, and he's got 2 on there. He has an intro video and that one as well. So check those out, help him with the algorithm and getting those numbers up for him. It's all linked down below. Go check that out. So coming up, we've got actually lots coming up in terms of live streams. I've been trying to get a lot more of those moving. I've got one coming up on Thursday. I'm going to be looking at quote unquote a forgotten army group in Operation Barbarossa. The Axis invasion of the Soviet Union. This is a very different topic that is kind of completely aside to what I do on the channel. Obviously, I know about Operation Barbarossa, but Grant Harwood is going to come on and he's an expert in the Romanians. So, so it's going to be a good show, and there's going to be a lot more coming like that. And obviously, the Canadian content is not going anywhere. Like I said jokingly, but it's true. It's not going anywhere. It's just going to be expanding. Like I said on one of the last live streams, is I'm adding. I'm not taking away. I'm adding. Because I want to cover as much history as I can and get people interested in all kinds of stories. So, so be just keep in touch with losing the ability to speak. Look out for things on social media and posts on here, and you'll see about those coming up. So thanks again, Alex. Do you enjoy talking with our little group here?
No, I loved it. Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited to come on here for ages, so I'm so glad we finally got the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and I'm hoping to have you back. And
no, I'd love to. Yeah, by all means. I mean, I'm sure we can think of other things to talk about.
Yeah, we can maybe one of the articles you write, we can do a deep dive.
I'd love that. That sounds
Because
awesome.
deep dives are always fun. We'll pick one. You write so much. I don't know how you do it. But, I think
Coffee.
I think I'd go crazy. And I wrote a dissertation, and I think I would go nuts the amount you write. Anyway, yeah, so thanks everyone for hanging out. And if you want to become a patron or YouTube channel member for OTD, that would be much appreciated. Help me keep doing what I'm doing. Other than that, I will see everyone on Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time with Grant. So I'm looking forward to that and the next one. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you later. Have a good evening, everyone.